Good afternoon, and thank you for joining us. My name is Robin Maggio, and I'd like to welcome you to our webcast, Developing Partnerships with Parents and Caregivers with Dr. Lee Kern. Today's webcast is part of the National Resource Center on ADHD's Ask the Expert Series Educator Edition. The NRC is a program of CHAD funded by the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Prevention and provides reliable, science-based information about current medical research in ADHD management. It is a pleasure to introduce today's guest expert, Dr. Lee Kern. Dr. Kern has worked in the field of special education for more than 25 years as a classroom teacher, behavior specialist, consultant, and faculty member. She received her doctorate in special education from the University of South Florida and is currently a professor of special education at Lehigh University. She works primarily with students with social, emotional, and behavior problems and has published numerous articles, book chapters, and 3 books. She is currently editor of the Journal of Positive Behavior Interventions, associate editor of School Mental Health, and serves on the editorial boards of 6 other educational journals. Again, we are pleased to welcome our guest expert today, Dr. Lee Kern.
Thank you, Robin. I'm really happy to be here talking about developing partnerships with parents and caregivers because it's such an important issue. My last project was a 5-year grant with high school students with emotional behavioral problems, and almost all of their parents reported feeling very disconnected from their child's school. And I can't tell you how many said that their communication issues started very early on. So I want to emphasize how important it is to get off to a good start. So today, I'm going to first identify ways to communicate with parents and caregivers. I'm also going to explain some of the typical classroom strategies you might be using that can be easily tailored to home activities. And I'm going to provide examples of how parents and caregivers can embed pre-academic skill instruction into home routines. Just to start with a little background, behavior management has consistently been a major concern for both teachers and parents. We know, depending on the study, that as many as 15% of young children have significant symptoms of ADHD, enough so that they could receive a diagnosis. So that means on average, there's going to be about 1 in every preschool. And parents and caregivers both receive limited instruction in behavior management. We know that even for school-age children, teachers are likely to get either 0 or 1 course in their preparation program regarding behavior management. And preschool teachers generally receive fewer than that, and parents typically don't receive any support. But there are skills and strategies that teachers and parents can learn and put into practice to improve their child's behavior at home as well as at school, and some of them are very simple to implement. So let's talk about why partnerships are so important. Well, they're essential for child learning to occur outside of the classroom. And this is mainly because it helps preschoolers with ADHD who need consistent reinforcement of positive behavior and early pre-academic skills. Because of their impulsivity and attention, they are much more likely to learn if there's consistency across the home and preschool setting. And also, it strengthens the work that you're doing in the classroom to help with challenging behavior and school readiness. Also, consistency across settings, as I mentioned, can prevent problem behaviors. The most effective strategies we now know are focused on prevention and teaching alternative behaviors, and parents need to learn those strategies. It's also important that parents understand how their child is doing in school, both academically and behaviorally, so they can help support those efforts. And when problems do arise, it's much more successful to collaborate and work together to resolve those problems. There's also a lot of research showing the benefits that parent involvement has, and much of the research has been also conducted with children with ADHD and children who have behavior problems and are behind academically. So the research shows that parents of children who are involved, or children have higher grades and test scores if their parents are involved with the school. They have better long-term academic achievement. We also see better attendance, better attitudes towards school, such as increased maturity and better student self-concepts. And we see reduced behavior problems at school. And also, this seems to be particularly important when children are younger. As children age, parents become less and less involved and have less of an impact on behavior and academics. I'm sure that you know that peers become much more important as children enter adolescence. So it's particularly important to get them involved early and try to keep that involvement as long as we can and as long as parents continue to have influence, a significant influence over their child's behavior. And young children with or at risk for ADHD do not do as well as their same age peers in academics, and they also demonstrate higher levels of disruptive behavior. We see that these children start off school and preschool and kindergarten behind academically, and that gap actually increases throughout school. So it's important to address these skill deficits early and see if we can close that gap, and hopefully by giving them a boost at an early age, they won't lag behind so significantly as they age through school. We also know that parents are experts on their children. We have moved away from the kind of medical model where professionals know better than parents. Parents know a lot about their child, and they may know a lot of strategies that help improve behaviors, and it's very helpful to share those strategies. At the same time, teachers are experts in the classroom. They know the curriculum, they know the expectations at school, you'll know the expectations of a preschool setting and how to get kids ready for kindergarten. So it's important that we work with parents to make sure children learn those skills as well. And finally, teachers also have access to behavior management training that teachers may not have access to. They may also have resources that they can access, and parents don't know how to necessarily have those same resources. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about strategies to enhance communication. First, it's really important to make contact early in the year, and I know how busy it is at the beginning of the school year, and you're so tied up doing other things, and it's hard to remember to do this. But we don't want to wait for problem behavior to accelerate to contact parents. It's important to contact them early on and to start off on a good note. Let parents know that you're there to work as a team. It's also important to plan to discuss progress regularly. There's a tendency to only contact parents when the child has problems or when the child isn't doing well. And typically, we can identify who these children are earlier if they're not already diagnosed with ADHD, which may happen. They tend to exhibit symptoms of overactivity and inattention compared to their typical peers, so you'll see that they really do stand out. So it's important that parents understand that they're at risk even if they're not diagnosed, and that regular contact is needed so you can continue to make progress with the child. So it's important to determine how often. We recommend at least weekly, but it depends on the frequency or rate of problem behavior. If children engage in problem behavior every day, it's good to have daily contact. So you should establish a frequency of contact. And it's also good to plan how to most effectively communicate. So what is parents' preferred mode of communication? Would they prefer to receive an email each night or each week? Do they want a communication book that gets sent back and forth? This works if parents want to communicate to you things that might have happened at home that you might want to consider during the school day. Some parents prefer to be called or texted. And even there are some electronic ways to communicate almost immediately with parents. So it's important to establish some kind of a plan for the mode of communication. And these are some examples I'm going to show you of communication strategies. The first one is pre-printed expectations. So these might be the classroom expectations, for example, following directions, listening carefully, and you simply write the date and the child's name indicating what classroom expectation the child followed that day. It helps the parents know what the expectations are in advance. They can make it clear to their child. And also I want to point out that the expectations should focus on desirable behaviors. We want to keep reminding children of what they're supposed to do, not just what they're not supposed to do. This second example is a checklist. It's easy because it lists all the behaviors you might be looking for, and you simply have to check off. It also leaves a place for notes. And you'll see at the bottom, it has a section for parent signature, so the parent can sign at night and then return it the next day so you're sure that the parent received the note. And again, these can be sent electronically as well. And this is an example of what we refer to as the daily behavior report. This format is increasingly being used as a proximal measure of behavior, so it can serve several different purposes. It's sensitive to child change, so if you're implementing different strategies to try to improve behavior, this sort of a format helps to log or assess whether you see child improvement as a result of those interventions. So it's sensitive to change. If children's behavior improves, you should see it on this format. This one shows a 10-point scale, which the research shows is the most sensitive to change, but you don't have to use 10 points. 10 points can be a little bit cumbersome. You can use 5 points. Those are effective. That's effective as well, or even 3 points. A couple of things I want to point out about this. It shouldn't be punitive. So if a child receives a sad face, a 0, a 1, or a 2, we don't want the child to go home and have the parents punish them. We want to work with the parents so that they're instructing the child what they should be doing tomorrow. So they would sit down with the child and said, okay, we got a 2 today. Let's talk about what happened and how can you do better to get to tomorrow. Let's set some goals for tomorrow. And it's also most effective when you can agree on what each point means. It's most helpful that way and most useful for you to collect data on student progress. So you can even write down what these numbers correspond to or what these different facial expressions correspond to. So, for example, you might share with parents that, say, a 5 or a 6 means the child followed directions 80% of the time and also helped a peer. So it's best if you can define what these numbers mean. It's more helpful to you to track behavior and more helpful to parents to understand how their child's doing. So now I'm going to move on to some basic behavior management strategies that you may be using in the classroom that can also assist parents at home. I'm going to talk about providing praise and encouragement. I'm going to talk about establishing expectations and then creating schedules and routines. So we'll start first with providing praise and encouragement. Why is this important? Well, it's a powerful way that parents can show support, and it's important for their child's development. It also teaches children what is expected. It makes the expectations clear, which is especially important for parents who may have difficulty with consistency with their child. And it's a simple way to effectively increase desirable behavior, and they're easy to use, easy to give children praise. So how does it work? Praise is most effective if it's very specific. So it's particularly effective for children with ADHD because they don't tend to pick up on what they should be doing, or they don't tend to look around at their peers in school or their siblings and see what they're doing and follow what the other kids are doing. So it's important to be very specific when praising children so children know exactly what those expectations are. It's also more effective when it immediately follows the desired behavior. The closer in time it is, the more clear it is to the child exactly what he or she has done that's being praised. And the more frequently and more consistently it's done, the better, at least in the beginning. Once children are learning and engaging more frequently in appropriate behavior, those praise statements can be faded once behavior is well established. So here are some examples, and I always think it's helpful to provide parents with a lot of examples, especially because it doesn't come naturally for parents, and parents sometimes tend to focus on the negative behavior that their children are engaging in. These children tend to misbehave and are oftentimes demanding at home, and we know that there's a coercive cycle that parents engage in with their children. So the child engages in negative behavior, the parent responds negatively, and the child continues the negative behavior, and there's a cycle that we see with children and parents with ADHD that we don't see with typically developing parents. So it's better to be real specific with parents about how they need to be praising their child. So some examples, very specific. You did a nice job washing hands rather than way to go. I'm proud of the way you put the cars in the bin rather than simply saying nice job, or great sitting at the table instead of I like that. And like I said, we see that a lot of parents are challenged by this. They're not used to praising their child, and when they're behaving well, they tend to leave well enough alone, and they jump in when their child is misbehaving. So we have different strategies we use. We sometimes give parents, say, 5 or 10 rubber bands and have them put it around their wrist, and over the next hour they need to give the child 10 praise statements, and every time they praise their child, they move the rubber band from one wrist to the other, and at the end of the hour, they look and see how many rubber bands they have on each hand. We've also had parents set the timers on their iPhone, and maybe for every 5 or 10 minutes, and every time the timer goes off, as soon as they see their child behaving appropriately, they need to praise them. So getting parents into the cycle of focusing on appropriate behavior and praising their child for that appropriate behavior, so that children are engaging in appropriate behavior to get that attention from their parents rather than engaging in inappropriate behavior. The second strategy I'm going to talk about is establishing expectations at home. So why is this important? Well, it makes it clear to children what the parents expect of them. And again, this is important for parents who tend to be inconsistent. And it helps focus parents on teaching appropriate behavior. Focus on teaching and reinforcing children when they're doing what they're supposed to be doing. So how do we do this? Parents should establish no more than 5 expectations, 3 or even better, especially for parents that have difficulty following through. They need to be brief and clear. It's best if children can remember what the expectations are, so if they're very brief, it's easier to remember for young children. They should tell the children what to do. Again, we want parents to be teaching their child what they want of them, not continuously interacting or telling them what they're doing wrong. They need to tell them what will happen if they comply. For example, if you follow all of the expectations tonight, we'll have 5 more minutes of story time. Or we can watch a movie or a TV show at the end of the night. And also, what will happen if they don't comply? So, for example, if you don't share with your brother, I'll have to take your toy away. And then again, we want to praise children for following expectations. These are some examples of expectations that sometimes can overlap or be similar in the classroom and home. So you may have expectations that pertain to respecting people around you, how they speak to each other, being helpful and responsible, taking care of classroom and school property, trying your hardest. And these are expectations of house rules, examples that you can provide for parents. Listen when mom and dad are talking, sit at the table during meal times, put away toys when we are finished playing, and share with your brother or sister. We find it's really helpful for parents who are struggling, for preschool teachers to show the parents the expectations at school, and it helps them develop similar expectations at home. A few guidelines. Again, the expectations need to be stated positively, and parents need to be consistent about those expectations. Implement or develop expectations that you know you can follow. Start small. You can add later. We also don't want to assume that children know what the expectation is or know how to adhere to that expectation. So we want parents to model the expectation and then provide frequent praise for when the child is following the expectation. We want to give children a sufficient amount of time to follow instructions, so we want to wait for a response. If they don't comply, then we want to restate the expectation if needed and indicate what will happen if they don't follow the expectation. And again, we want to encourage parents to avoid threats, which they often don't follow through on. We simply want them to state the consequence and then make sure it's delivered. And sometimes it's helpful with parents to identify particular situations that are problematic. So the grocery store or shopping is often problematic for children with ADHD. It's a little bit overstimulating, a little bit exciting, a lot going on. So this is an example of how we might identify that situation and help parents with expectations at home. So we identified that the store is a problem. What exactly is the problem? My child runs ahead of me through the parking lot and into the store. So we want to set up the expectation. So again, we're identifying what particularly about that activity is problematic. We set up expectations, walking feet and stay next to me. We establish the consequence. If you meet the expectations, you can walk independently, you can pick the cart, and you can earn a sticker or any one of those. If you don't meet the expectations, you're going to need to hold my hand, and we're going to return to the car and start over. And then it's important that parents follow through. Consistency is very important, again, especially with children at risk for ADHD. And we encourage parents to go to the store when they don't really need to shop. So if they need to shop for the groceries that week, go at another time. But when they're trying to teach their child appropriate behavior in the store, just plan on buying a couple of things. So let's practice going to the store, seeing if your child can adhere to this expectations. Remember, it's a teaching opportunity. We'll buy a couple of things, and then we'll come the next day or a couple of days later and practice again. So now I'm going to move on to the third strategy, creating schedules and routines. Why is it important to do this? Parents often report that particular activities are problematic for their child, or they don't remember to do things at home, or you might notice at school that a child is tired and the parent might tell you that they didn't sleep well the previous night. They have difficulty with the bedtime routine, getting them to go to bed, and so it's important to create some kind of schedule and routine. And also, we know that ADHD is hereditary, and because parents of children with ADHD are more likely to have ADHD themselves, this can be very helpful for the parent as well. So, and it helps with predictability, and it also helps the likelihood that the child will comply. The schedules tell you what's coming, what the child's to do, what happens first, next, last, and if it's the same today than it was yesterday. So if there are changes across days, that can be built into the schedule. And this gives a little bit of a framework for creating a schedule depending on where and when the child is having problems. So a schedule organizes the day So, for example, and I'm going to show you a few examples, but a Monday, the child might go to preschool, come home, have a snack, take a nap, play, have dinner, and then go to bed. So that schedule kind of are broad activities across the day. A routine is a specific part of the day. So, for example, bedtime routines, children usually benefit from having some sort of routine, going to bed where maybe they put their pajamas on, brush their teeth, go to the bathroom, go to bed, read a story, and so forth. And then an activity is even a more specific part of a routine, and it might be something that the child has particular difficulties with. So a lot of kids don't like to brush their teeth, so you might have a toothbrushing routine that gives them the specific steps of that activity. So again, why do we do this? It helps the child know what to expect. It increases the child participation and likelihood of completing desired tasks. It provides children opportunities to increase independence, and also it provides important learning opportunities. It enables children to learn skills and activities that they need to complete. So these are examples of home schedules. This is a routine where parents often report having difficulty getting their children up and off to school. So if you notice that a child is late or late coming in, and you might recommend this kind of a schedule. So this shows activities prior to going to school. And as you can see, they're Velcro. The activities are on Velcro so they can easily be changed each day. This is another example of a daily schedule. Again, these are broad activities throughout the day. And this kind of a schedule is particularly good for children who don't like to end activities, especially if they're preferred, or engage in problem behaviors during transition, or even children who have some anxiety issues and like to have the day somewhat predictable. And you can see that there's an arrow that is moved up and down when each activity is completed, and children can actually move that arrow, and in fact they like to do that. They like to say, okay, this is done, now we're going to do the next thing. So it really helps with those transitions. This is an example of a routine that lists tasks the child needs to complete. So, for example, this is tasks. The tasks are go potty, get dressed, brush teeth, eat breakfast, chores, care for pets. And this kind of a routine, a schedule, can be easily linked to reinforcement system. So you can just count, the parents can just count the number of tasks in the done column that the child completed during the day and link that into some kind of reinforcement system. This is another example of a home routine. And you can see how the child moves it. This is one of our parents did. The child moves the tasks to the done column, or they close that. It's got a little magnetic where they can close it up once they've completed the task. And the children really like to move these things and feel like they've accomplished something during the day. This is another example of a home routine, a little broader. And this one illustrates a specific activity. So you can see it's similar to a task analysis that lists each step of a specific task. So in this case, it's dressing, and the tasks to complete that step are take off pajamas, put on underwear, put on pants, put on shirt, put on socks, and put on shoes. And this is really helpful for children that are easily distracted. Parents can prompt them and just say, what's next? Point to the activity schedule, and eventually they can fade that out, and parents and the child will complete the task without the parents right there. This is another example of a specific activity. This is toothbrushing, which again we find children don't like to do. So this gives them the steps: put toothpaste on brush, brush teeth, rinse toothbrush. There are many, many different kinds of schedules depending on parent preference. Some have words, some have no words, just drawings. You can print out pictures from a computer, or children can cut photos from magazines or actual photographs of the child. There are also electronic schedules that children can use and use them, check them off electronically. But in general, they increase predictability, some guidelines. They need to be posted, they need to be taught, and they need to be reviewed regularly to be most effective. Schedules are also a really good way to prepare children for change, whether it's expected or unexpected. So, for example, sometimes children's schedule changes every day. They might go to preschool 3 days a week, so the schedule on the days they don't go is going to be different from the days they go. Or maybe the schedule doesn't vary so much, but they're ineffective or unanticipated events, such as a grandmother's coming for a visit or something of that nature. So it can provide some warning so children can anticipate change. And this illustrates how to teach children to use a schedule. You can see the steps on the left-hand side, taking the picture off, saying the picture name, time to, putting the picture in the pocket, and doing the task. And it's important that parents show or teach their child how to use the schedule. We use a very effective sequence of modeling. You do it, so the parent demonstrates, guiding. We do it together. We show the child how to do it, and then we let the child do it independently. And we find that sometimes parents are a little bit overwhelmed with putting together, or some parents. Many parents love schedules and say that it's been really effective for their child and for them as well. But some parents we find are a little overwhelmed, and it's good to just have them start small. They don't need to schedule the entire day. Or if they have a child who's really anxious about daily events, they can just make a general schedule, like go to school, come home from school, play, have a snack, and so forth. So start small, and then they can fill in the details later, or start with just the most problematic situation and then add more later. And the last thing I'm going to talk about is embedding pre-academic skills in the home setting. So why do we want to do this? Well, preschool-age children, as I mentioned, with or at risk, do not do as well as their peers in ADHD. And by the third grade, they're significantly behind, unfortunately, and that gap tends to widen. And our work recently in particular has focused on trying to give them a boost, and we're continuing to look at the extent to which that affects academic achievement later on, but it looks like it does. So it's really important so that they're not behind academically, and so that gap doesn't continue throughout their schooling career, that we give them that boost early so they can start kindergarten and first grade on level and hopefully maintain that with supports. In addition, there are increased national standards for education, and children are expected to know much more by kindergarten entry. So it's important, especially for children with or at risk for ADHD, to teach those skills in preschool. And children at risk need to be taught reading and math early, as I mentioned, to prepare them. If we give them this boost, they do much better. They really need it at an early age because of the inattention and hyperactivity. So I'm going to talk about just one strategy. There are a lot of strategies that parents can use at home, both with respect to reading and math. But I'm going to talk about one strategy, which is dialogic reading, because it appears to be very, very effective, and it's also fairly easy for parents to implement it. It's an easy strategy, it's an easy approach, and it fits easily into the routines that parents are already doing in the area of reading. So typically what we see when adults read to their child is that the parent reads and the child sits passively and listens. But there are much more effective ways for teaching children with ADHD to read, or giving them those early those pre-academic reading skills that address their inattention. We like dialogic reading because it's very structured. It has structured strategies for parents to use, and the child becomes an active participant, which is very important for children with attention difficulties or who are hyperactive. And the adult also learns to listen and serve as a questioner. So just to give you an example, if you think about learning to play an instrument, people don't really learn by listening to someone else. And the same thing goes for reading. Some children can pick up, when the parents read, and they can look at the page and pick up the relationship between what their parents are reading and the pre-academic skills such as letter recognition and so on. But children with ADHD or those symptoms tend not to pick those up. They're not as attentive, and so it's important to implement a more structured approach. So dialogic reading has been shown, let me move on to the next slide, has been shown to boost reading in just a few weeks if it's done consistently. It's been shown to increase pre-academic skills like vocabulary and pre-reading by several months within the scope of just a couple of weeks. And research shows that it's most effective when it's used 10 to 20 minutes a day, which is kind of typical of the amount of time that parents generally read to their young child. So dialogic reading has a number of acronyms to help parents. I'm going to show you just one example. There are explicit videos, there are books, there are also online resources if you want to implement the strategy that will provide you more detail. But this is one of the approaches that you can teach parents right off the bat. It's easy to use. The acronym is CROWD, and this CROWD is used to remind parents what to do while they're reading to their child. So the C stands for completion prompts. So this is where you leave a blank at the end of the sentence for the child to fill in. And it usually works well with rhyming books or predictable books. So, for example, I'm going to give you an example. I think I want to be a cat, a little plump but not too. And I can't hear what you're responding, so I'm hoping you were thinking fat. If you were, that's correct. So that's where a blank at the end of the sentence. There's also the R stands for recall prompts. These ask the children what happened in a book. So they ask them to recall specific things that happened. So, for example, can you tell me where Mr. Jones went? Can you tell me what the cow did? So these can be used throughout the book, not just at the end. The O stands for open-ended prompts, and these focus on pictures in the book. So you can simply ask the child, tell me what's happening in this picture, and it helps children increase expressive language fluency and also attend to detail, which tends to be difficult for children with ADHD. The WH, or the W, H got stuck in there, are prompts, and those are questions that begin with what, where, when, why, and how. And it's a specific question to help attention and recall. So, for example, we might simply say, what did the cow eat? Or what did the boy do? The D stands for distancing prompts. And so these are prompts that help children relate pictures and the story to experiences outside of the book. So, for example, we might ask something like, if a giraffe in the book was eating corn, and I don't even know if giraffes eat corn, but that's an example. We might ask the child, do you remember what the giraffe was eating when we went to the zoo? So it helps bridge that reading with the real world. I'm going to give you some additional examples of crowd prompts. So here's an O. What do you think he is thinking about? The W. What is coming out of the apple? You might recognize this book. The D, remember when we were playing outside yesterday? where do worms live? Where else do worms live? Another W prompt, which picture is a picture of a jar? An O prompt, you're pointing to the picture and asking what happened to this apple. Another O prompt, how do you think they get the apple into the jar? Here are some more examples. A C prompt, Hedgie eats, what does Hedgie eat? An O prompt, you probably recognize this book as well. What else do you think Hedgie eats? A WH prompt, what letter is this? While you're pointing to the A in the apple. R, what is this guy's name? An O prompt, O from the crowd, tell me what's happening in this picture. And WH, what is different about these apples on Hedgie's head compared to the apples on his head before page 4? So we also use Post-it notes, and if you have parents who tend not to read to their children, or maybe they don't have many books at home, and we often have a book exchange program where we can give parents books, but we post notes in the books if we think parents are going to have challenges with this, and we write the questions ahead of time. We write examples of questions on little Post-it notes, and so that helps parents understand how to practice how to use the approach with prompts. We also have book exchanges with parents, and they leave their own questions and prompts in the book. So they'll write questions, and then they'll leave it in the book, and they'll exchange it with another parent, so that for parents who have difficulty generating questions or thinking of all these different types of CRWD questions, they're already there. Another strategy is to teach one kind of prompt at a time. So let's just start with CR this week, and then next week we'll add OW, and so forth. So again, this is a very effective approach that looks like it's really promising with children with ADHD. The research in general with poor readers shows it's very effective. So that is the end of my presentation. Are there questions?
All right, great. Thank you, Dr. Kern, for your insights and suggestions and all the great information. So we do have a question, and one that came in is you were recommending multiple tools for communication towards the beginning of your presentation. So when teachers are starting out to use a communication tool with parents, is it better to choose one of those tools and use it for a set period of time or even kind of throughout the whole school year? Or would you recommend trying out a few to see what works best?
I think it's important to find, that's a great question, by the way, and I know it can be overwhelming to try to identify what's the best strategy. I think it's important to identify something, number one, that's going to be easy for you as a teacher. Number one, that you're going to be able to do regularly. If it's really laborious and takes too much time or you don't like it, it's not going to work. You're not going to be able to stick to it. So I would suggest selecting something that's easy for you to use and that is something that is consistent with the way you like to communicate. So if you don't like to communicate by text, don't give parents that option. And number two, find something that you both can agree upon is a good way to communicate. So I would say find something that is effective, that the parents will respond to, the parents will read regularly, that you know you're being successful with the communication. And if it's working, I would stick with it. If it's not working or parents, are forgetting to sign and return the note, you might want to try a different strategy. You might want to move to a text and ask them, respond as soon as they get the text. Some parents don't necessarily go through their child's bag, or the child may have difficulties remembering to bring a note home at night, and so a text might be more effective. I think it's more important that there's consistency, so you're reporting on a specific behavior that you're trying to improve, and that you're reporting regularly. So I'm not sure the mode of communication is as important. If you feel like you need to change it, I think that's okay. So I hope that answered your question.
Yes, great, thank you. We also have a question. A couple of people have been asking, where can they get more information about the dialogic reading? Do you have some specific resources you could share, or websites or books that you recommend?
Sure. You can probably just Google it and get it. I know there are videos available, and I think that would be great to share with parents. I'm pretty sure they're commercially available. I'm not positive, though. I know we developed them for a project, and I know we got them from somebody who had another project going. But if you want to email me, okay, it's lek6@lehigh.edu. So it's LEK followed by the number 6 at lehigh.edu. And I would be glad to send you links. I'd have to dig them up, but they won't be hard. That won't be hard. I can send you links or resources on dialogic reading. I'm glad people are asking about that because I love the approach. We looked at a lot of different approaches when we developed our parent education program, and this is the one we got the best feedback on from parents. They found it easy. The prompts were really helpful, the sticky notes, and it was easy for them to learn. And there are a couple of other acronyms they have as well. So I think it's pretty straightforward for parents, and like I said, they seem to really like it.
Great, thank you. Do you have any sort of additional last-minute tips or maybe any other specific pre-academic skills to recommend besides the dialogic reading that tend to work well?
And there's a math program. I can't recall the name right off. I'm trying to recall it off the top of my head, but let's see. It was developed through University of California, Irvine. Riverside, University of California, Riverside. And there are simple strategies. They have a number of different strategies in math that parents can use. It's a program, and if you email me, if you want to get the name, I just can't remember the specific name off the top of my head, but we like it because it has different levels parents select, like if they're busy, if they're in a busy situation, or, there are different ways that parents select strategies to use, and there's strategies that can be used like in the car. So in the car, you can count the number of stop signs, or, they have a number of different strategies that can be embedded into routines that parents typically do. So that you can probably, some of them are probably, there are strategies available online, but again, we like this, and we pulled out some of the strategies and the math strategies and would send them home on little cards to the parents. So it would say, try this when you're in the car, try this when you're cooking. Ask the child, what 1 cup plus 1 cup is, how many cups is it? So it has strategies to teach mathematics. And I'm sorry, I just can't remember the name offhand, but again, if you want to email me, I can send it to you. The dialogic reading is great. And I think just, some parents will come in and tell you their child has already been diagnosed. That's important to know. It's going to be helpful to develop strategies and communication right off the bat. You'll see other children who come in, and you'll notice right away. I think if you're even early in your career, you can tell the children that are much more active than others, or much more inattentive than others. And it's so important to get in there right from the beginning and address those problems and figure out strategies to support them so they're not behind and so they don't continue to engage in problem behaviors.
Great, thank you. I want to thank you, Dr. Kern, for all of your information, for sharing everything with us today. Thank you to all of our participants for joining us. Again, thank you to Dr. Kern and to all of you for joining us. This concludes our webcast.